Hello, I'm Jamal Khalili, and I'm delighted to be your host here for the Royal Academy of Engineering's Engineering Review of the Year. We're going to be asking a group of engineering experts about their perspectives on some of the biggest engineering stories of 2023. So, a few words from me first. Artificial intelligence is undoubtedly one of the most impactful technologies to be brought to the forefront of mainstream consciousness this year. In fact, I believe AI has been labelled as the Collins Dictionary Word of the Year. Well, earlier in the year, of course, we all know that ChatGPT burst on the scenes, became a household name. More recently, of course, in the UK, hosted the AI Safety Summit, which saw 28 countries, plus the EU, sign the Bletchley Declaration, committing to develop AI safety and for the benefit of the global community. COP28 has just started at the United Arab Emirates, following multiple reports of climate and temperature records being broken around the world this year, with the UN warning that we're on track for a 3-degree Celsius rise in temperature. In the UK, the Prime Minister set out his new approach to net zero, which drew some criticism, but also included a commitment to create a new 150 million Green Future Fellowship programme to support scientists and engineers to develop real breakthrough green technologies to be delivered by the Royal Academy of Engineering. Other news that was welcomed by the engineering and science community was the UK's association to the Horizon Europe and Copernicus programmes, following an agreement with the EU. Confirmation of the association was praised by engineering businesses and academia alike for enabling greater international collaboration that, of course, is essential for addressing the many critical challenges that the world faces. All of which gives us plenty of material to reflect on, and I look forward to hearing engineering perspectives on these stories and themes from our panel in just a moment. We'll also be taking your questions, so to submit a question to the panel, please send it via the Slido link that's displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also find the link in the YouTube chat. You can submit your questions throughout the evening's discussion. We'll keep them and sift through them, and you can even vote on the more popular ones. We'll raise them to the top of the pile, and I will then pose the questions to the panel and see how many we can get through. Okay, so without further ado, I will introduce the panelists. I'm joined here in the studio from my far left by Dr. John Lazar, CBE, FREng, who is chair of the Royal Academy of Engineering's Enterprise Committee, a co-founder also and general partner at Enza Capital, and chair of the Raspberry Pi Foundation and Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation Judge. Next, we have Dr. Hayatun Silem, CBE, who is CEO of the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering Foundation. Next, Professor Chris Wise, FREng, Senior Director at Expedition Engineering. And in a change to the advertised panel, unfortunately, Professor Sana Karagani can't join us. She's been unwell and had to step down, so we wish her a speedy recovery. But luckily, we have an excellent replacement. Please welcome Dr. Natasha McCarthy, Associate Director of Policy here at the Academy. So thank you for bravely stepping in at the last minute. Welcome to you all. So to start off, I want to ask each of you what you thought was the biggest story of 2023 from an engineering perspective. Shall we just start from your end, John?
Yeah, obviously there's been a huge amount of discussion about AI generally, as you introduced him. So I think what I've been really interested in is the follow-on from what's happened with ChatGPT and Claude being released in the wild. And one of my highlights of the year has just been understanding the kind of ferment of activity of working out in practice how these things really actually work. And there was a fantastic Harvard Business Review paper that talked about a jagged technological edge. And Azim as well, from an exponential view, then added to that saying it's a shifting jagged technological edge. And what we don't really understand is, with those models, when are they useful, how are they useful, and on the other hand, when do they hallucinate and when can we not believe them? And I just think that's just an absolutely fascinating real-world kind of manifestation of the LLMs being released into the wild. I have a personal highlight, which is relevant. I was very lucky to be able to go with the Royal Academy of Engineering's Explore program to San Francisco in February with 5 of the companies that came through our enterprise hub. And what really struck me about all of them is, amidst all of the hype, these are people using AI to help solve very grounded, practical engineering problems. So things like electronic skins for robots to help them pick fruit, sorting out waste in the construction industry, sorting out supply chains worldwide. It's a very practical, very grounded, and under the covers, that progress has been fantastic this year.
We don't hear so much about it. They're not,
exactly.
not like ChatGPT, of course. Hayatım.
Thank you. Well, yeah, we're a bit spoilt for choice this year, actually. But I think I would pick out the confirmation in September that the UK would associate to Horizon Europe, which, of course, is the world's biggest civil research and innovation programme and an absolutely key vehicle for collaboration right across Europe and beyond. And, of course, there was this huge consensus across the research and innovation community that association was good for the UK, it would be good for Europe. But following the UK's exit from the EU, we had this prolonged period, this very difficult period of uncertainty, which was damaging for collaboration and it was damaging for individual researchers. And so over a period of, to my alarm, 7 years, our academy, along with many others, worked very closely with government to try to make sure that we could secure association, and also that in that worst case scenario where association just wasn't possible, that we'd have some sort of a domestic alternative to launch in its place. So it was a real moment. It was an almighty relief, I think it's fair to say, when association was finally confirmed back in September. And I don't think I've ever seen anything unify the research and innovation community in quite that way.
Doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't happen that often. And of course, today it's very appropriate we're talking about this because we've had final ratification, that's sort of the final seal on the deal, if you like, in Brussels. And I'll tell you, I'm missing a party in Brussels to be here tonight, which is obviously the better
Thank
gig.
you so much. Well, this is where it's all at. Anyway.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Hayatım. Chris?
I'm going to go for a more human-centric one, which is the Institution of Structural Engineers Climate Action Committee and all the stuff they've been doing around driving behaviour change amongst people like me who are practicing engineers working in the built environment. And the built environment accounts for 40% of global carbon, roughly. So if you're working in that space, you have been part of the problem and you're obviously potentially part of the solution. And the Structures Climate Action Gang have done an amazing job in just changing people's perception of what their responsibility is and getting them to the point that they say, okay, right, how do I do this stuff? And actually helping them. So I think I'm a proud engineer, and I really think it's something that we can do that's in the gift of engineers and not many other people on the planet to really improve things. But we have to know how to do it, and we have to take that responsibility seriously. So my favourite thing of the year is just to see the sort of growth in that empowerment caused by people like the Structures.
Great, thank you. Fine, Natasha.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go full circle back to AI, so echo a little bit of what John said at the beginning. I think for me, I've worked in questions around AI and digital tech policy for some time, and it was excellent this year to see those really kind of amplified around the AI summit, and obviously, really got a lot of momentum behind them because of seeing almost experiments in the wild because of the huge spread of technologies like ChatGPT. So I think that's been a really interesting story this year. What I'd really like to see is that seen as an engineering story, because I think in a lot of people's minds, AI and engineering are not necessarily that closely linked, but I think they are, and they should be, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. We need to think about these things as engineered technologies. A personal highlight for me is that one of the things we do at the Academy, which I really enjoy, is we connect policymakers with engineers to think about their policy challenges. So we've had policy fellows who've worked on a wide range of issues, some very technical, some much more broad social challenges. And a lot of them have been in the Academy on a couple of occasions this year to celebrate what they've done, to share their knowledge, and to really spread the message that engineering really has a lot to lend to the thinking behind policy making. So for me, seeing those people in the room, being grateful for what the Academy has done for them is a real personal highlight.
You're allowed to have personal highlights. Well, thank you all. Okay, so if you are just joining us now, we're talking about the engineering highlights of 2023. So we've mentioned the AI, we've mentioned Horizon Europe, various topics that we're going to be touching upon in our discussion. Okay, let's turn back to AI then, which of course, as both you and John have mentioned, has been in the news so much this year. To many people, it's represented a wave of new technologies that bring a lot of promise and opportunity for the future, but also concern and, of course, even fear. Governments around the world have been treating issues related to its safety very seriously, and we saw this in the recent AI Safety Summit. Natasha, what are your reflections following the summit, the Safety Summit, about the state of AI? Here we are, December 23. Was it just over a year since things like ChatGPT arrived on the scene? Reflections on what's come out of the summit and where things stand now.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, we are still in December 2023, about 3 weeks away from the end of the year, and in AI terms, that's a long time, so who knows what's going to happen next. So, as mentioned, I think the AI Safety Summit was a really important moment in the conversation around AI, and I think it really created a focus for a broad and inclusive conversation around AI. And I say that knowing that in the run-up to the summit, there was some concern that the focus on kind of existential risk around frontier AI was a little bit narrow. There have been an enormous range of organisations showing kind of some of the challenges are about AI for a long time, highlighting the need for it to be inclusive, for it to work for everybody, and highlighting some of the challenges with the lack of fairness and bias in AI. But actually, I think the fact that this was happening in the UK created a moment where a lot of that community came together, and what they wanted to address was amplified. And it was really good to see people from government supporting the AI fringe that happened around the summit itself and taking part in that. So what was a really important conversation about the potential longer-term risks around AI was coupled with a lot of diverse conversations about some of the more urgent and widespread challenges. So I think it was really important that we've got that really on the agenda now. For me, the last day of the AI Fringe, we heard from some of the key participants in the summit itself. We weren't there as the Academy, I wasn't there unfortunately, but I got to hear back from what was happening. And a sort of a comment that's really stood out for me was from the Chief Scientific Advisor, Dame Angela McLean, who was talking about some of these foundation models. And she said, we need to engineer these with safety designed in from the start. And she pointed out, as I said, this need for an engineering approach to these models. Because there's a sector that moves very quickly, a lot of it's done is very experimentally, but as these systems are used at scale and on really important challenges, we need to engineer them with safety in mind. We have to engineer them with purpose in mind. And Dame Angela also talked about bringing scientific rigour to the way we do AI. So I think that's a really important lesson. And for me, that's about tapping into the knowledge that engineers have about creating safe systems and testing for safety and making safety cases. But it's also about knowing that AI is an engineered technology. This is not about genies and bottles. It's not something we've discovered that we can't control. It's something that we have created as engineers, that we have designed, and that we have the capability to shape to meet societal needs, and also to shape to make sure that we're designing out wherever possible harms to society. So for me, that coming out of that summit, that sense to need to engineer in safety from the start is a really important message.
And you mentioned, of course, it was held in the UK. What do you think has been achieved in the UK in terms of goals for the summit, setting this country up as a world leader in AI safety? Where should the UK focus its efforts now in investing in AI research and innovation?
I mean, I think it's absolutely showing great leadership for the UK to host this AI Safety Summit. But it's something that every nation engaged with AI, which is every nation really, has to be engaged with. AI safety is paramount, and so leadership is important in terms of convening that conversation. But everybody who works on AI has to focus on safety. That said, I think there's a real opportunity for the UK to think about safe and responsible and trustworthy AI. And we have an ecosystem in the UK, we have brilliant AI capability, but a really good track record of thinking about the governance of emerging technology, the governance of science. And so bringing that together to be a real strength for the UK is really important. Another thing that we do really well is listen to the public about technology. So I think a big priority has to be building in long-term public listening about AI. And that's both to ensure that we can create systems that are safe for everybody, but also to make sure that we are focusing our science and innovation on the areas of AI that can bring most benefit, the challenges that are important to people. So I think that's a really important opportunity for the UK.
Thank you. John, how can the UK develop a balanced AI ecosystem? Startups, SMEs need to be enabled to play an important role alongside the big tech companies, the famous ones, and as well as policymakers.
Well, I mean, firstly, just to say that I think Natasha's analysis of the summit is absolutely spot on. And I think for me, incredibly important that governance structures are not set up in a way that makes it almost impossible for anybody to comply than the very, very large players. So that's the first point. For example, there's a lot of really, really interesting innovation happening in the open source community around AI, particularly building smaller models that require less compute. And we can see the open source stuff as a threat because, who knows who's going to use it. But on the other hand, there's a lot of innovation there that's incredibly helpful to smaller players. And if you think about it, what smaller SMEs and startups need is, number one, they need funding. Secondly, they need access to compute. And thirdly, they need some access to data on a really large scale. On the funding side, I actually think the situation is quite strong in the UK. I mean, if you take global funding, VC funding for early stage companies, it's kind of fallen off a cliff. AI has remained pretty steady, but within that, generative AI has gone from $3 billion to $25 billion during the course of 2023. So there's a lot of funding coming through. We're going to talk about spin-outs later. We have a fantastic array of AI companies coming out of the universities, and the good news is that we can see ways in which that funding will come, either through BBB, or if the Mansion House reforms come to fruition, we can see that funding coming in. So I feel really reasonably bullish about that. On the compute side, it's actually interesting because so many of NVIDIA's chips are already earmarked for the next 3 years for the Magnificent Seven companies. So my point around open source there becomes particularly critical. We need to be in a position where people can run this on normal computers, even on their phones. And then finally on data, I think what's interesting is that a lot of smaller companies now are focusing on how they serve corporate communities where they're not necessarily needing enormous amounts of data to train huge models. And that's very positive if we can create the structures to allow them to actually innovate in that space. The final point I'd make is that I do feel very heartened by the progress that the government's Frontier AI Task Force has made. Ian Hogarth, who chairs that, is a fantastic practitioner. He understands AI. He's one of the most prolific early stage investors in AI. And if you actually look at what they've done, they've hired really, really strong people, some of the best people in governance as well. They're focusing on compute with supercomputer in Bristol. They're engaging a lot of the community organizations that Natasha was talking about. So, a long way to go, but that's positive.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to another topic. Hayatun, we've seen reports from the manufacturing industry this year saying there's already a noticeable lack of technical skills hampering take-up of AI. How crucial will updating the education curriculum be across all stages to reflect the new digital skills that future engineers across all disciplines are going to need and going to use?
I mean, there is undoubtedly a major challenge to try to make sure that our curriculum stays fit for today and fit for the future. And then alongside thinking about the curriculum, the content of what we're teaching, we've got to think about how we can support people who are being expected to deliver this evolving curriculum, because many of the people who are currently teaching engineering have, of course, trained at a time when these technologies did not have the significance that they do today. And I think, we live in this area where the pace of technology development is intimidating even for those who are driving it. So this is a very real challenge. But actually, I think almost the bigger upskilling challenge is in terms of how we can support companies to deploy these technologies across engineering industry, manufacturing industry at large. It's interesting, today we saw the launch of the Resolution Foundation's report on ending stagnation. And that really speaks to the importance of sustained investment in skills and in technology. And it highlights very clearly the cost to all of society if we fail to do that. So I think we need to have a more holistic view of how we can support upskilling right across our economy. If we can do that, it's fantastic from the perspective of competitive advantage. And if we fail to do that, we've got to recognise that even our technologically advanced companies of today, in terms of engineering and manufacturing, might not be as competitive in the future.
And sticking with the education curriculum, Chris, the Prime Minister pushed this year for maths to be taught to the age of 18. How important are other skills or subjects in the wider curriculum for preparing future generations, as Hayattin was saying, for this increasingly cross-disciplinary, ever-changing world that we live in today?
I mean, I think human beings, we're fundamentally social animals, and I think that we do our best work when we're looking out for each other and we're actually collaborating properly. And I think that so those skills are really, really important. And I think that it's tempting to think that there might be a technological fix for absolutely everything. But you can see when you look at the students coming through from school to university in engineering and design courses and things like that, and in practice, they're looking for more than just the ability to practice technological stuff. They want to do something worthwhile. And also they recognize that we're in a bit of a pickle, and somebody has to get us out of it. So I think that there's the broadening of skills. So the old-fashioned, slightly silo-based engineering view of the world, or is something which I think is broadly outdated. I think we need lots of T-shaped people or pie-shaped people, with a deep skill, but really well connected into.
Trying to imagine that.
I think a T-shaped person is somebody who has maybe one deep skill but also some breadth. But the really important thing about it is that the tips of the T don't just disappear into nothing. They're actually connected to other T-shaped people and organisations. And really you want to link them all together into a big circle so that if you pass a message around the ring, it gets around. So that sort of collaboration between people who understand the specialisms but are able to join it into a bigger picture, I think is really important. And, as you say, the most of the people involved in practice or in teaching are brought up in we're all of a generation where those sort of things were maybe understood tacitly, but they weren't really taught specifically, whereas you were taught maths, physics and chemistry. And so I think that the broadening out of that into things that people can actually learn in order to become a compassionate and responsible designer in any field, I think is really important. And if you look at what the Joint Board of Moderators ask for example, they talk about engineers needing to understand social and environmental justice, which is not something that you can do by with a calculator or with a computer very easily. And so that if you want to become a practicing engineer, you need to have those things in your playbook. I also think there's an opportunity for people to start to move away from the slightly sausage machine view of engineering as something which is a service which you buy by the hour, you buy by the pound. We should be much more working on the basis of what the outcomes are, and we should be judged on those, not on how long we've spent doing it. And if somebody can do something that has a beneficial outcome, that's something that should be rewarded. And you need to, I think the current generation of engineers needs to really be one that's empowered to think of itself as able to take collective decisions in order to get beneficial outcomes, rather than just cranking the handle, following a technical set of codes and imagining that somehow that will be all right, because it clearly hasn't been and it won't be going forward.
Thank you. Well, I mean, speaking of global challenges, of course, the climate crisis is something that focuses the mind. COP28 is currently taking place in Dubai, with 2023 set to be the hottest year on record. Hayatan, can you tell us about some of the involvement the academies had in COP28?
Sure. So through Engineering X, which is our international collaboration that we co-founded with the Lloyd's Register Foundation to accelerate progress on critical safety and sustainability problems that exist worldwide, we were delighted that we launched at COP27 a multi-stakeholder partnership to try to end the open burning of waste. So this is not something that's incredibly well understood, but it's massively significant. I think around 2 billion people worldwide lack access to proper waste management. And of course, the consequence of this is that they have to dispose of waste through burning or dumping that waste. And a person dies every 30 seconds as a result of a disease or an illness that is associated with air pollution. And alongside that, there's a massive penalty in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. This is a really, really important issue. And so I'm delighted that the Engineering X team is represented at COP28. And over the weekend, they were showcasing some of the pilot projects that have been launched in order to try and tackle open burning in a really practical way. And alongside that, we've got a couple of Enterprise Hub members also there, including, of course, Notpla, who were the Earthshot winners from the UK last year as a result of their innovative sustainable packaging. And I would just say
From seaweed.
From seaweed, brilliantly, from seaweed. So I'd also just add as an aside that I've been really pleased to see in recent years a move to not just recognise that we have to tackle carbon emissions, which of course is an appropriate focus of efforts around sustainability, but this broader recognition that things like material reuse and reduction and circular economies, these are really important components of how we will actually reach a more sustainable way of living. So it's really good to see some of the Enterprise Hub companies really embracing that and leading the way.
Another engineering innovation, of course, is to do with these pioneering sustainable technologies. We're talking about fuel cell technology. So Ceres Power won the 2023 McRobert Award, the UK's most prestigious engineering award, for its groundbreaking fuel cell technology. How impactful are initiatives like the government's recently announced £150 million Green Future Fellowships likely to be in developing more breakthrough technologies for net zero in particular?
Absolutely. So just very briefly, one of the things that's very cool about Ceres Power's technology is that it's reversible. So you can use multiple fuels to generate electricity in a really efficient way when and where you need it, or you can run it in reverse and generate green hydrogen in a cost-efficient and efficient, energy-efficient way. So it's a very cool tool to have in your toolkit when tackling sustainability challenges. But yes, we are extremely excited at the prospect of launching our Green Future Fellowships next year, hopefully, early next year. And we, through this programme, anticipate supporting at least 50 fellows in this area. They will be researchers and innovators, pioneers, drawn from all disciplines, who are really concerned with drawing on groundbreaking technologies and creating that route to market, accelerating the rate at which we are deploying climate innovations. Because I think that need to speed up to get there faster is so crucial. There are a lot of promising technologies out there. What we want to do with Green Future Fellowships is try to make sure that more of them hit impact sooner. So we're really excited and looking forward to that. And although there are many technologies that do exist, there's also many types of innovation, including social innovation, that we are going to need to help create that transformative systems of systems shift that actually moving to a net zero economy and a more sustainable way of living involves.
Bringing two of the things we've been talking about together, Natasha, if we come back to AI, how can AI help us create a more sustainable net zero future? Alternatively, in what ways will AI systems likely impact our environment?
Well, I think it has to, really. I mean, AI is, as we've discussed, a really powerful, ever-evolving technology, and we need to use the powerful tools we've got to address what is the challenge of our time. And I think if we look at something like the way the grid in the UK is going to change in the coming years, huge changes in the level of kind of use of renewables on the grid, huge change in the demands from the grid as lots more systems are electrified to decarbonise them, so in transport and heating. And we're looking at a greater mix of energy, we're looking at different sorts of suppliers, and we're looking at ever more kind of diversification in terms of the size of organisations that are shaping the grid. So when you've got something that complex, you need a technology like AI, I think, to be able to manage that change and manage a complex system. And I think what's needed there is it's the collaboration between the different businesses, companies that are part of our energy supply chain, and the way that they use digitalisation and data has got to be really collaborative to use AI to its fullest potential. But, you know, as Hayatan said, moving to net zero is a system of systems challenges. It's all about, you know, how we make changes to how we do transport, how we have mobility, how we live our lives. And there's going to be various different sort of shifts in behaviours, and AI is going to be really important to understand across a complex system like that what changes are effective in reducing carbon emissions, what changes are effective in reducing energy demand and which are not. So we need to make sure that we have the data from those different systems so that we can use tools like AI to understand impacts of decarbonisation in one area, impacts of moving, say, from one mode of transport to another. So we need that data, but also we need to make sure we're investing in the AI capability for that kind of complex systems management too. So that's really important. But finally, you know, we talked about the fact that this is a general purpose technology that's going to change a lot of behaviours and create new behaviours. People are using ChatGPT. It didn't exist a year ago. It's being used at scale. So we really do need to know what the energy footprint of the tech is itself and make sure we're using this technology responsibly and developing it responsibly so it doesn't add to the challenge of getting to net zero.
And you know, we tend to forget, a lot of people forget, they assume AI is there, it's going to take our jobs, it's going to replace us, it's going to do things that, and forgetting that it's a tool that helps us solve problems that we can't, are becoming too complex for us to solve. John, looking both at the startups you're overseeing in the UK and your work with entrepreneurs supported by the Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation, are there new engineering solutions being developed for a more sustainable world that you're particularly excited about?
Yes, on a quite broad scale. I mean, I'll probably highlight 3 areas. You know, we're talking about COP28. I think there's been a really, really interesting bit of momentum since the COP15 Biodiversity conference a year ago now in Montreal. And it's become clear that maximizing carbon capture on a sort of narrow scale doesn't necessarily produce healthy ecosystems, whereas if you look after the ecosystems, you do actually get good carbon capture anyway. So I'm really interested in this, and it's also interesting, particularly in the context of the goal to get 30 by 30, which is 30% protection by 2030 of biodiversity, which mostly falls disproportionately on the global south. And 80% of biodiversity is actually protected by local indigenous communities. So we need to find solutions to support those people. So there's quite a lot of stuff out there, but there's one company in Kenya which I think is particularly interesting called Earthacre. And what they're using is they're working with local communities. They're using LiDAR, drones, birdsong to map biodiversity, and then producing this huge model which allows them to then actually fold that into carbon models. They have a partnership with Bumitra, who do satellite-based soil carbon capture, just won an Earthshot Prize. So I'm really interested in that space, and that's moving super quickly. We've got a couple of companies that have come through the latest round of the Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation that are doing similar things. The second one is all around what a lot of companies in Africa are dealing with is scarcity, as opposed to abundance. So just a sort of huge amount of innovation around we were talking about batteries, so I think we will see the first big rollout of electric motorbikes with battery swapping as opposed to battery charging, probably happening in Africa before anywhere else. Right. So that's technology that's moving very, very fast. We've got super smart people. We've got a fantastic company called Second Life Battery coming from Rwanda on our latest intake. You're taking old EV batteries and repurposing them for large packs to support telecoms towers. Or a company in Nigeria called, which is doing a retrofit of petrol engines with a very, very smart kit for putting batteries into them. So I'm really excited about all of that. And then I guess finally, we talked about NOTPLA. There's a lot happening both in Africa and here, just around really smart biochemical approaches on a broader scale, picking up on Hyacinth's point. So a company in Ghana called Myco Solutions that's actually taking a really, really smart way of using virus, bacteria, and fungi on sewage to produce textiles and leather substitutes. This is a perfect case. And then a couple more from the Enterprise Hub. I mean, I could go on forever, but Pure Affinity, growing membranes to filter contaminants, or brilliant company called Diversifying that's taking dye from used fashion items and recycling the dye for use in new forms. So all of that stuff moving very, very fast.
Wonderful stuff. Chris, the built environment makes up such a huge proportion of the world's carbon emissions, of course. We've seen big projects this year, like the Battersea Power Station, which won the major project award for sustainability. We've seen them reuse, refurbish existing building structures. How do we need to reimagine how we construct new buildings? I mean, can we have a complete regeneration using low carbon?
That's a big question. So people think that timber is a very good low carbon material, which it isn't really. It's a carbon store. It's rather beautiful, and so you can take advantage of it from the sort of human factor side of things to use a carbon storing material. But at the end of its life, it needs to. You have to do something with it, and ideally, you want to reuse the timber. A lot of steel is recycled. Much harder to recycle concrete and reinforcement and all those sorts of things. They tend to get downcycled, so they're not as good in their second life as they were perhaps in their first life. There is a decarbonisation of steel making, which is actually very helpful through electric arc furnaces, which means that you can, especially if you use renewable energy in the grid, you can then use recycled steel with a very low carbon content, which is very, very helpful because it's a good material. I think from the point of view of the planet as a whole, you're looking at mature or historically industrialized countries which have mature building stock, which is in many cases not going to be used for what it was designed for. And so it's going to be, and about 80% of the buildings that we will have in 2050 we already have in places like the UK or in Europe. And so working out how to change them and how to adapt them, it becomes a skill. It's a sort of make, do and mend skill, but at a building scale. Trying to imagine what you need to put into a new building if you're designing it now is very difficult because, of course, we don't know what the future is going to hold. So I think that the philosophy that a lot of people are using is to not to disable the future, but to enable it.
I mean, how do we ensure we understand the lifetime of future materials for new buildings? I mean, we saw what happened with rack concrete.
We did.
Story in school buildings this year.
Yes.
How do we make sure those mistakes aren't?
I think the simple answer to that is you prototype them. And I think that there's the custom and practice in the built environment is that each project is an economic entity unto itself, and it's a little bit expensive to prototype for a single project usually, but it's not expensive, and it would be really, really helpful if people would prototype on the basis of providing information which is useful for lots and lots of projects. It's not the norm. But I think it has to be, and I think that one of the main challenges we have, and I think has been historically, is that the people who are working in the design community, so consultants, designers, people who are working on the construction side, find it very difficult to access research funding because they're thought of as being rather heavy industrialists, and they've got plenty of money and they can always charge their clients.
Right.
The truth is that we can't do that, and so I think that needs a more rounded view on how you prototype on behalf of everyone in the built environment. And then I can think of hundreds of places, but I'll just give you one, which is that we do not know when we look at the buildings that we have, how they're actually performing. We can't measure it. And in particular on the columns, the walls, the foundations, which have storing all this carbon, which have been sitting around for a long, long time. We have no idea whether they're working at near their capacity or at half their capacity. We simply can't measure it. So if we could develop through a prototyping process a way of actually testing in real time, real buildings, real bridges, real roads, real anything, we would get a much better handle, a much better data set, at which point we can feed that back into the next generation. But we don't do it because we don't have that research funding coming through into the built environment.
Staying on infrastructure, another problem. So, of course, we've seen challenges with other major infrastructure decisions this year, notably HS2, and plenty of commentary about their impact, certainly on regional economies. Yeah. How can engineers approach infrastructure projects generally to ensure that all aspects of a project, from the technology to the processes involved, are aligned?
Engineers need to go upstream. So I think that the Harvard Graduate School of Design described engineering as a political activity, and certainly historically it was a political activity. If you think about the Great West Railway or Brunel and Stevenson and what they got up to, I think that. There are too few engineers working at the policy and political end of things, and particularly across multiple governments, because the challenge with big infrastructure projects like HS2 or even the Olympics or water infrastructure or energy infrastructure, as you just mentioned, in terms of trying to decarbonise the grid, is that you can't plan that project, run it, and finish it in the lifetime of a single parliament. It runs through multiple parliaments, but there's a reluctance for people to commit on the sort of never to start something really big, because who knows what's going to happen to it down the line, and there's a political will to make sure that you do something that's positive so you get re-elected, of course. So I think that the challenge for engineers who are, I'm sure some of them are political, is to get involved at the end and to illustrate what's possible. And I think one of the skills of an engineer is to take something that is it's an unimagined thing, and to give it flesh, to explain what it's going to be like, how it will perform, to give people confidence that if they were to invest in it, it actually would work. Which is, if you think about it, it's quite difficult to do when you are faced with absolutely nothing apart from a request to pay lots and lots of money. What politician is going to vote for that? It's going to be tricky. So I think infrastructure in particular suffers because you need more confidence building through multiple parliaments in order to even start it. And I think on it, if you just take HS2 specifically, I think that there's which is a very complex project. It has, everybody can think of a whole bunch of other things that we could have spent the money on, for sure. But as I said, that's fundamentally a political decision at a time when, as people remember, the economy wasn't doing brilliantly, and people were hoping that there would be job creation coming from central government, and so it did serve that purpose. And I think that but you have to. It shows how complicated the decisions are, because you're trying to balance that short-term need with a long-term benefit, which HS2 provides. But you're mapping it against schools, hospitals, the health service, and everything else, the energy infrastructure at the same time. The water infrastructure, which everyone's clearly upset about the sewage spills. It's not easy being an engineer. Everybody has a go at you all the time.
It's a hard life.
It is.
2023 also saw the creation of the government's new Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Hayat, how significant was this development for the UK's engineering, science, technology communities? And what does it signal in terms of the government's commitment to investing in innovation?
Well, I mean, shocking as this may sound, I don't generally get that excited about machinery of government changes, but this one actually got my pulse racing, because I think it was a very strong signal that science, engineering, research, innovation are now seen as vital to the UK's resilience, prosperity, our experience of living in this country. And I think that that is a reflection of the reality. So it's been quite exciting actually to see the department really grip the opportunity. I mean, we've got a seat at top table now. So there's a cabinet minister representing research, innovation, engineering, technology. And the department has really been very enthusiastic at trying to build its own capability to be a technologically enabled department and to play a sort of advocacy and support role across Whitehall, so that there's a stronger kind of technology, engineering, science, literacy, and a kind of pro-innovation mindset across government. Actually, interestingly, off the back of Chris's point, I think one thing that will flow from this is that our world has become more political. So this brings engineering back into the centre of politics, where it hasn't actually been for recent years. I used to work in Parliament a couple of decades ago, and it was not the topic on which constituents were writing to their MPs. So I think we're going to experience a different kind of set of scrutiny and pressures that come with being more politically important. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But actually, overall, I think it's a positive reflection that policymakers have realised the extent to which engineering technology are shaping our world. They are shaping matters that are of political importance, and that is certainly the reality that we experience.
Well, the government recently published the highly anticipated independent review of university spin-out companies. John, coming to you, does the review of the UK spin-out landscape address the changes that we need to support academic entrepreneurs and in a thriving spin-out ecosystem?
Overall, Jim, it was Irene Tracy and Andrew Williamson who produced the report. I mean, and we've been, as an academy, super involved in sort of providing input over a long period. I think it's a very good report. There's 11 recommendations. They're all sensible. A lot of it is around how do we standardise terms of spin-outs, how do we gather data, how do we get transfer officers that can work regionally, how do we think about funding, how do we increase the sort of porosity between people leaving academia and coming back into it. So overall, really good. And then what is even more positive is the government very quickly responded and accepted all the recommendations. And there's some quite concrete points that they make there, particularly around funding, supporting the extra funding going into the BBB, obviously the mention of the Mansion House reforms. So I think the challenge now is execution. How do we actually make sure that we, as a community, execute on all of the recommendations and make sure they come to fruition? And I think as an academy, that's a place where we can really play a role, just keeping everybody's feet to the fire and make sure that.
Are we catching up with the US, for example? They've been so good for so long, spin out.
Yeah, honestly, the quality of the spin-outs and the number of spin-outs coming out of UK universities is fantastic. And if you look at the quality of the research and the quality of the engineering, it's fantastic. So the issue is not that. The issue is how do we then grow those companies? And I think this report gives us a really strong base to move that forward. So I am positive about it, but with the caveat that we now need to make sure 11 recommendations get implemented.
Right. Okay, one final quick question for me before we open up to the audience. I guess this one's for you, Hayatan, again. Further reflecting on the importance of nurturing engineering innovation, of course, the global Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering reached a huge milestone this year, celebrating a decade since it was founded, with His Majesty the King presenting the most recent winners of the prize at Buckingham Palace. Now, I'd argue that the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering has become known as the world's most prestigious engineering accolade, the Nobel Prize for Engineering. I know it well. I was a judge on the panel for 6 years. How has it created such an extraordinary legacy for the global engineering community in such a short space of time?
Well, obviously, Jim, it must be the quality of our judges.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that.
But if I give you a slightly fuller answer, I think the power of the prize is in shining a light on innovations that have transformed our world, but without necessarily us really noticing that. And to do so in a way that celebrates and connects with, or rather, helps the next generation to connect with what those innovations mean. So if you look back over the past 10 years, we've recognised the teams behind the Internet and the World Wide Web, behind GPS, behind LED lighting, targeted drug delivery, solar power. Imagine how different our world would look without these innovations. And I think, it's fantastic to recognise the people who've reached the very pinnacle of the profession. But at its heart, this prize is supposed to be a beacon to attract more people into engineering, to see themselves having a future in that career, and for people, across society to see the role that engineering plays in their lives. So I'm particularly pleased that this year we have opened the first permanent gallery at London's iconic Science Museum, which celebrates the role that engineers play in our lives and shines light on who they actually are. Who are these people who've been responsible for these extraordinary innovations? So imaginatively, the gallery is called Engineers, but it is a wonderful way for us to hopefully help a new generation to connect with engineering, its role in society, and to do so in a way that uses as the focal point the innovations that were created by these fantastic Queen Elizabeth Prize laureates, and also looking at the engineers who are now taking forward those innovations so that they live on in the new products and services that we're seeing in society today and in generations to come.
Great. Okay, so we have 24 minutes left, which means we have plenty of time because we're now going to open it up for discussion with some of your questions. Just a reminder that you can submit your questions to our panel by sending them via the Slido link displayed on the screen. You can also find the link in the YouTube chat. I've got questions coming in, so I've got my tablet ready here. Keep them coming, though. We'll try to answer as many as we can before we run out of time. So, without further ado, the font on the screen is much smaller than my script. Right, okay, so first question from Mike Oxtiff, who says, there's a big shortage of diversity in the AI sector. How can this be improved? Natasha?
It's a great observation. I was really sorry that Sana couldn't join today, but she did offer some points of reflection beforehand. And one of the stats was that back in 2019, only 25% of people in the tech sector were women, and you don't need to be a data scientist to work at that. Doesn't reflect society. And when you look at leadership, even smaller proportions of women. So it's a massive challenge, and I think that it's a challenge that we see in engineering as well. But the way I think about it is that I think we need to think about these technologies for what they do. To attract people in, we need to see what the opportunity is. And you made the point, engineering is a political activity. I like to say engineering is a social science, and that's true, I think, for AI too. These are about systems that work for people and solve challenges. And I think if we can broaden out the conversation about what this technology is and what it can be used for, we can hopefully broaden out the opportunities for people to take up and hopefully therefore make it attractive to more people. But it's vital that we do this, because we're creating a new general purpose technology that's going to affect everybody, and it has to work for everybody, and it has to not create inequalities, and that means that we need to have equality of input coming in. So it's a huge challenge and really important. And I think we can learn, for example, what we do at the Academy with This is Engineering, a brilliant campaign that shows the diversity of what it is to be an engineer, the tasks that people work on, the challenges we tackle. We need to do this with AI to bring in that kind of breadth of talent and knowledge into the technologies we're developing.
It always seems like a no-brainer to me. If apparently half the population are female.
Indeed.
I mean, when you miss out on such a large pool from the population, think of all the talent that we're missing out on if we're turning them off for whatever reason, because it's been so embedded that it's a male-dominated discipline. Absolutely.
We have to create opportunities for everyone. Everyone needs to be engaged in this really exciting new part of the economy. So, it's our duty to make sure we keep working on that diversity challenge.
Can I just add to that?
Absolutely.
I think the other really, really crucial point, which obviously the Academy is involved in, but also more broadly, it's incredibly important to get girls at a very young age to get interested, and also to extend out to other disadvantaged communities. So obviously, this is engineering played a big role in that, but the other example I can give just from my own work is Raspberry Pi's got a fantastic record of doing this at a very early stage, at key stage 2, 3, and 4, and recently launched a program with Google DeepMind specifically on AI, and is getting very, very good results, getting young girls involved in understanding the technology. So I think that's very, very important for what we do right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question from Matt Thomas, who asks, how do we empower new graduates with modern specialisms to implement that learning in a manufacturing industry that might be reluctant to implement new technologies as they're focused on volume produced or income generated? How do we prepare industry to realise the value of these graduates? Who would like to tackle that?
Maybe
Chris?
I'll have a go at that.
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the overwhelming number of people who work in manufacturing and construction actually work for quite small organisations. Mm-hmm. And they're pulled together by big organisations, but there are loads and loads of really good, innovative, small organisations around. And I think that's where perhaps people should be looking, because it's maybe easy to get a job there, but you're going to be at the cutting edge rather than, let's say, with people who might not be in the first flush of youth. And I think that the way that things are changing is becoming more local. And the reason it's becoming more local is because it's so much easier to connect to people who are anywhere else, that you don't have to necessarily even travel to be able to participate. And I think that the sort of work locally but be global is something that we're familiar with in our everyday lives, of course. And I think for people coming into the world of engineering, it becomes it's a great way to develop your skill set, and it's easy now. And so I think that in our, the challenge is perhaps not to give you a too rarefied a parochial skill set which only fits into a traditional industry, but something that actually where you start working really hard to get involved with the innovation companies in the first flush of youth, and then of course those people are going to take over and run those companies, spin out their own later on. I think just on that sort of intergenerational thing, I think it's really, of course, it's very difficult for older people to say, well, we feel responsible for the situation that the planet is in, perhaps, and at the same time, we also feel perhaps we should get out of the way, because if we don't want to preach to people about what to do. But then certainly the things that we've been doing with an organisation called the Royal Designers for Industry, which is young designers and old designers from different walks of life. There's a great cross-fertilisation across the generations, where the confidence of youth isn't as confident as you might imagine. You actually need people to say, okay, support and encouragement, not preaching, but support and encouragement. It's really powerful.
Another example of that is just we see fantastic networks of young professionals across the professional bodies in engineering, and that can be a really good way to both feel like you're in a supportive peer group, but also to influence system change. And I mean, I can certainly say that we convene the CEOs of the professional bodies. There are more than 40 in the UK, and the influence that those early career professionals have on the thinking of that group is tremendous, and we're ready for more of that.
Just to pick up the local points as well, we did do a report as an academy around engineering, economy and place, and it's absolutely fascinating, because we have lots of areas in this country where we have incredible engineering expertise in particular arenas, very local.
Yeah.
And the conditions in each of those places are very, very different. And what we need is a very, very strong approach for each of them, which is an academy we're now building. So just as part of our enterprise hub, we have regional talent engine programs focused on those areas. We're building hubs, and we already have one in Northern Ireland, one in Wales, one in Scotland. We're doing a whole bunch more. And you've got to go in and work out what's the particular expertise in that area, and then how can you nurture it while also connecting those people to other partners in the area, to new skills with targeted funding. So we have to have a very, very specific place-based local approach to how we think about that.
Thank you. Okay, next question from Philippa Jefferies. She asked, are engineers skilled in the political requirements now needed of them? Is there something the Royal Academy could be doing to support engineers in ensuring their knowledge and skills are captured in the right way within the political environment? What do you...
Well, it's between us.
Whichever one of you jumps in first.
Well, should I start off? But I'm sure Hayata will add to this. the way we work often is bringing in, I mentioned this in my highlight of the year, is bringing in people from government to talk to engineers to get their benefit of their knowledge of systems thinking, and so that you can take a complex challenge and bring that kind of systems knowledge to it. And one of the things I say is that despite the fact that often politicians come from very different academic backgrounds to engineers, there's a lot of similarities between policy making decisions in government and engineering decision making. You've got to make decisions that work for hugely diverse and large-scale populations. You've got to make decisions that will work for a very long time, and you've got to think in that complex systems way. So when we match those engineers and policymakers together, you can see that real synergy of interest, and you can see that there's kind of ways of thinking that are common to both. And I think whilst we are in the market of giving that kind of engineering thinking to the policymaking sphere, the engineers that get involved in that really benefit from that. And I think that organisations like the Academy and the team that I run have a really important brokering role to bridge between the expertise, the deep knowledge of engineers, and the way we work across over 40 professional engineering institutions. That's a great diversity of knowledge, from very emerging technology to people that are deploying systems on the ground. Tapping into that and making that accessible to policymakers is a key role for organisations like ours, so that we can make sure that those conversations are really productive between people in engineering and people making those key government decisions.
And I'll just add briefly that I think it's going to have to be a core part of engineers' sort of citizens' education, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm really pleased that through our Awardee Excellence community, it gives us a chance to work with more early career engineers to make sure that they are docking into that policy making process. They have so much to offer. Every time we have a round table for a minister or a senior civil servant, where we bring together, for example, our hub members, there's a chemistry there. The messages that they land are incredibly powerful. And I think that it's also really important that we support the government in their current ambitions to, for example, bring more engineers into government on secondment, so things like the Expert Exchange, STEM Futures. So it's really good to see that there's now appetite on both sides, and yes, we hope to play our part in supporting that.
Excellent. Right, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I wanted to leave enough time for you to sum up and look to the future. But maybe time for one or two more questions. One from Anonymous. Quite a no, it's a perfectly fine question. It's just quite a broad one. Anonymous asks, how much of a role and impact does engineering play in the broader UK economy? I mean, you can just say huge, and everything's engineering in the end. But
well, engineering accounts for, I think it's a third of economic output. So what's that, £650 billion a year of gross added value? So that's one number.
So maybe I can just build on that and say the engineering economy in place work that John referenced earlier. It's a very detailed piece of work, and do have a look if you're interested in this sort of thing. But what it shows you is that engineering is everywhere in the UK, and although there is a lot of regional variation, what you also see is that there are hotspots, so in other words, places where engineering accounts for a significant proportion of local jobs. There are hotspots almost everywhere across the UK, so from West Cumbria to Mid-Ulster to Aberdeenshire, you see real economic significance to the engineering economy. And you can also see that there are lots of places where they aren't sort of necessarily the kind of the high-tech end of engineering. They may not be the R&D intensive places, but they benefit from the halo effect around that. So, for example, South Derbyshire really benefits from being part of the kind of key supply chains for Derby, which is obviously a place where we headquarter lots of significant engineering and R&D businesses. So you see it's quite a complex picture, but also some real clues as to how we can perhaps enhance the value capture associated with proximity to engineering centres of excellence across the UK. So it is a massively important part of our economy, and an engineering job on average I think has 23% higher value add than an average job across the UK economy. So with 5.7 million people in the UK working in UK engineering as engineers, this starts to be pretty significant pretty quickly.
How do you define value?
That's for the economists.
No, it's not. No, it's not, because it's not just economy.
Well, it's not, but I mean, for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm going to let you go and play with the portal, and Metro Dynamics did the analysis for us. So if you have follow-up questions, I'd be delighted to make the introduction.
It's a fantastic report. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, probably time for one more question. So this is from one of the Academy's fellows, Professor Iqbal Mujtaba. who says, tackling water issues around the globe requires multidisciplinary approaches. Science, engineering, social science, political science, management. How will the Academy bring people from all disciplines to solve this global challenge? How should we prepare our future graduates in this respect?
Shall I start off?
Yeah.
I think a great benefit of being at a place like at the Royal Academy of Engineering is what we call our convening power, and the ability to kind of broker conversations across sectors, across disciplines. In whatever we do, we always bring in expertise and knowledge from beyond engineering, because, you know, these are system challenges, and they do indeed, as the questioner asked, require that insight from across different professions. We work closely with our colleagues in our sister national academies, the Royal Society, the British Academy for Humanities and Social Sciences, and the Academy of Medical Sciences. And we need to do that really good brokering and that skilled development of conversations. I think in terms of engineering knowledge, I think that we have to be cognizant, and we've heard this point already, that engineering is not just a technical discipline at all. It is a discipline that, as I like to say, it is a social science. It is about serving society, and I can't think of any more important issue alongside, you know, reaching net zero as to making sure we have clean, safe water across the globe. So we have to make sure that we have that capability in engineering to have those multidisciplinary conversations, and I do think the Academy has a key role in enabling that.
Thank you. Well, we have a few more minutes left, but I wanted to ask each of you, there's a final question to address to all of you. Looking to the future, what do you see as the most crucial challenge that engineers can address? I mean, you have look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals or whatever, but I mean, do you feel there's one that engineers can really contribute to in a way that maybe other sectors...
I mean, I'll maybe give it a shot first. I think so. You mentioned systems thinking, and I think that there's a strong need to develop a cohort of people who are specialists in being generalists. So specialist generalists, if you like. So people who can synthesize things, who can stitch them together, who can look across multi fields. But from a technical position. So they have a technical grounding, and they can bring that insight into the bigger picture. So I think that our and we're short of those people, frankly, certainly in practice. So I think that there's so that you think you mentioned the 40 disciplines or the 40 engineering institutions. We really need, I would say, throw them all in the waste paper basket, metaphorically, and develop a systems thinking discipline, which is something which then can join the specialisms back together again.
Thank you.
That would be my answer.
Natasha, what's the most crucial challenge that engineers can address?
My goodness, I think there's no major challenge at the moment that hasn't got an engineering component. So, I mean, we focused a lot on the climate and decarbonisation. That's absolutely critical. But I think, importantly, we need to think about the ways that these issues interconnect and that we create a way of thinking that is about resilience. And I think that's where engineering has a really important role to play, is thinking about how are we resilient as a society, how will we ensure that the infrastructure we depend on is resilient. If we are going to see climate change, we need to be able to make sure that the services we depend on are resilient to extreme weather, that are resilient to shocks like the pandemic. And I think engineering has a key role in building resilience. It has a key role in understanding the interdependencies between different social and technical infrastructures and making sure that they can flex to the challenges that we will see and make sure that they are resilient and do not cause any harm to any particular community, but they are resilient for everybody.
Thank you. John?
I mean, I agree with Natasha that we could pick a whole range of things. I mean, I do think that the issue around climate change is way more urgent than we are necessarily giving attention to. So I think that has to move fast. I also think that so many of the solutions that we're looking at actually are incredibly exciting in terms of transforming the way we live and the way our economy works. And I think what engineers are very good at is being simultaneously both sort of optimistic and forward-looking, because they want to find solutions, while also being very, very grounded. And if you look at climate change, there's not going to be one thing that we're going to do. We're going to have to do everything across the whole spectrum, from the most evolutionary all the way to the most ambitious. And what engineers can do in that situation is generally be very, very grounded about what is actually going to work, and provide that input to broader society as we make those decisions. So I think that's where we can make, and Chris's point about systems thinking and the way we think about that is incredibly important, but that's where engineering habits of mind really make a difference.
Thank you. Hayatan.
Thank you. I think I have to pick up straight from there and say that I do think that there is this urgency about the imperative to utilise engineering tools and approaches to accelerate the rate at which we are actually responding to the sustainability crisis. That is just so huge, we can't ignore that. But what's very important from my perspective is that we do that in a way that requires us to be a bit smart, I think, about the extent to which people are experiencing the impacts, both positive and negative, of engineering technology. So if you think about where we are today, we're in a very polarised world, and unfortunately technology is accelerating polarisation rather than the reverse. So what we need is to move towards a more sustainable position, but in a way that has balanced benefits for different groups in society, different nations in the world. And what I realise as I'm talking is I have inadvertently reinvented the Academy's mission, which is harnessing the power of engineering to build a sustainable society and an inclusive economy that works for everyone. So there you go. So I love my job so much, I've just trotted out the Academy's.
It's in your DNA now.
I can't help it. It also happens to be true.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. So building resilience, systems thinking, sustainability, being grounded, all aspects of what it means to do engineering. We're coming to the end of our time here today. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you all. This past year has clearly presented engineering with some significant opportunities and challenges. From AI taking centre stage to the ongoing challenge of achieving net zero, the UK's association with Horizon Europe, to the latest technological and digital innovations that will be crucial for the challenges of the future. Thank you so much to our panel, Natasha, Chris, Hayatan and John, for giving us so much food for thought tonight. Thank you to the Academy, and thank you to you, our audience, for all your questions. There were many others that we didn't have time to get through. I apologise. Please do fill in a brief outline feedback form in the link on the YouTube chat under the video. It may take you a couple of minutes. The Academy really appreciates it. Your feedback is very important to us. With that, thank you all for watching, and good night.